Well, hello, boys and girls. It's been a while since we've last seen each other. I hope you're doing well with what's going on in today's world. You know, last time we saw each other, man, we were going through the attributes on Sunday mornings. We were going through a different series on Wednesdays. It was mighty fun. But as time went on, pandemic hit and a lot of things happened. With that being said, today we're going to open up the Word of God. And as we open up the Word of God, boys and girls, what we're going to see is a Psalm of David. We're going to be reading Psalm 40. So if you would, boys and girls, if you join me like good old neighbors, open up the Bible to Psalm 40. Lucky for me, I saved the page. I'll give you some time to get there. All right, we're going to be going over 5 verses in Psalm 40. So if you would, come along, join me in Psalm 40. Let me read. From the choir director, a psalm of David. I wait patiently for the Lord, and he inclined to me and heard my cry. He brought me up out of the pit of destruction, out of the miry clay, and he set my feet upon the rock, making my footsteps firm. He put a new song in my mouth, and a song of praise to our God. Many will see and fear, and will trust in the Lord. How blessed is the man who has made the Lord his trust, and has not turned to the proud, nor to those who lapse in falsehood. Many, O Lord my God, and the wonders to which you have done, and your thoughts towards us. There is none to compare with you. If I would declare and speak of them, they'd be too numerous to count. That's Psalm 41, 1 through 5, boys and girls. It's a magnificent psalm, and this is a psalm that David writes. As he writes this, he's thinking of praise and worship to the holy and perfect God. You see, Psalm is just a book full of poetry and all sorts of different things we can learn from, boys and girls. With that being said, David writes this in such a way where he's really just thinking on God. So we're going to want to walk through this before. And then we got some points I want you guys to write down. So let's walk through it together. I'll tell you how I'm going to do it so you can track along with me. We're going to read a verse. I'm going to explain it. And once we get through all 5 verses, then we'll get to our devotional side of our points. So you can have something to take home. So verse 1. I wait patiently for the Lord, and he inclined to me and heard my cry. Specifically, this is David speaking. He's talking about how throughout his life, in those moments he was having an issue, particularly in this situation, he was waiting patiently for our Father to answer his prayers. He'd been praying to God. And as he did, he said he noticed God turned to him. He inclined his ear, and he heard David's cry, David's prayers. Verse 2. He brought me out of the pit of destruction, out of the miry clay, and he set my feet upon the rock, making my footsteps firm. Friends, David, like you and me, were sinners, and you see, David knows this. David knows this. He's a very smart and wise man. He's lived throughout his life being chased, desiring to be murdered. But as he got desired to be murdered, he still trusted and leaned on the Lord. And yet even when he became king of Israel, sin crept into his life, and he battled and battled. So he knows that he deserves the destruction for his sin when he knows the God of this universe is holy. So he knows what he deserves and what this gracious, not just holy, but gracious God did for him by pulling him out of the pit of destruction, out of the disgusting, miry clay. But you see, not only did he take him out, he didn't abandon him once he put him back to the side, out of the miry clay, out of the pit of destruction, and let him wander off. No, God set David out of all the issues that he was having during this time that he was writing of daily life, he set his feet, if you look back at verse 2, and he sets his feet upon the rock, and he made his footsteps firm, boys and girls. Those footsteps are firm. You see then after that David specifically starts talking about what the reaction to all this he had. He put a new song into my mouth and a song of praise of our God. David is praising God for what he has done for him and providing for him. But then you see, there's such a beautiful picture that's painted that David explains to him. And put in where many will see and fear and will trust in the Lord. David is talking about that salvation that we can have in seeing God reverently and trusting in him fully with our lives. Next, we got verse 4. It says, "How blessed is the man who's made the Lord his trust and has not turned to the proud, nor to those who lapse into falsehood." David is just now seeing himself and seeing the future, giving wisdom to the people who also walk through the same path of life as we do. How blessed are they if they don't trust in those people who trust in themselves. And then we see in verse 5, as we continue, see, "Many, O Lord my God, are the wonders of what you have done, and your thoughts towards us. There is none to compare to you. If I would declare and speak of them, they'd be too numerous." Friends, you and me can't even explain or understand the things that God has done or can do. All we can do is bask in the ambiance of that truth, friends. So with that being said, as we walk through the first 5 verses, my friends, let's talk some points. Point 1, we're going to be going over what God has done. You see, we see in verse 1, we see God hears us. You see that in the very first verse? It talks about how David is just being inclined by God and God is hearing his prayer. On top of that, we see in verse 2, another thing that God does is he brings David, just like he would bring believers, out of the pit of destruction. After that, we see in verse 2 also, not only did he do that, but he set us on a firm foundation built of rock. He did that for David, and a principle that we can apply, friends, is that God hears our prayers and will care for us and has a careful plan. We may not think that the ground that we're on is soft, but he's good. And then another thing we see from God is that he's not comparable in verse 5. If you look back down to the Bible in verse 5, my friends, God is not comparable. So then I got some more things for us. We see that we worship God. We see that in verse 3. We also see that we're supposed to fear God. David said that that's something we're going to do out of our praises. We're going to have a reverence for him. We see that in verse 3. We'll also see that we trust the Lord in verse 3. And then he talks about how in verse 4, we as believers are blessed. Lastly, we don't even have words in verse 5 for his glory. So 3 things for us to take home for growth. Be in prayer because of these hard times, because God hears us. What was the thing that we saw about God? We see that he hears us. He heard David. He hears all of his children. Okay? Point 2 for our growth is we see that worship during the hard times. Like I told you earlier, this is something that David is writing as he's going on in daily life. You and me, friend, need to turn back to him and worship him, especially during this hard time, seeing as we're in a pandemic. And boys and girls, it's serious. Lastly, above all, friends, with what's going on today, be a good neighbor and trust in the Lord, as he'll get us through these hard times. Thanks again, friends, for joining me. Be a wonderful neighbor. Goodbye.